All right, test. Good afternoon, guys. How are you? Welcome. Happy Friday, TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. Hope you guys had a wonderful week. 5 of you watching. Hey, please post where you're watching from in the chat. So my fellow Nigerians, it happened yet again. They put their dirty, rotten, stinking hands on school kids yet again. Last week, it was Kebbi State where they abducted school children. Yesterday, it was Niger State. So, for those who are not paying attention, militants in a convoy of 60 motorcycles in Niger State, they convoyed up to a boarding school, an all-girls boarding school, and they wrangled up students, manhandled the security guard, and took off with school kids yet again. This is an ongoing issue, it's an ongoing matter in Nigeria right now. What kind of society are we in where school kids are not confident or don't feel safe to go to school and learn without fear of having their studies interrupted, and worst of all, fear of being snatched and separated from their parents? It happened yet again. So I want to ask you, did you go to boarding school in Nigeria? If so, where did you go? Which states did you go? I attended 2 years of boarding school in the village in Nigeria in the 90s. So this particular topic actually hits home for me because my wife, you see behind me, kids, she's an educator. She teaches calculus here in Las Vegas, Nevada. She's a teacher, teaches high school kids. And every day that I send my kids to school, my 2 young daughters behind me, I'm sending them to school to learn. I am trusting the school system to give them a safe space to be educated, trusting the school system to protect them. That is what we do as parents. And this particularly should actually hit home to all parents and soon to be parents. It is no longer a problem, guys. It's become an epidemic of sorts in Nigeria where people feel emboldened and bold enough to leave their homes and put their rotten fingers on our sons and daughters. It's bordering an epidemic. Is that what we are reduced to now as a nation that can't even protect our school system? It appears so, because this has been ongoing for far too long. And it's every parent's nightmare to send your child off to a boarding school to be educated, only to get that phone call that they are missing. It's bordering a catastrophe. And it's something that what needs to be done? Who do we need to get involved to remove this cancer that's eating at our community? Farmers are afraid to farm their lands. Parents are afraid to go to work. Teachers are afraid to go to school and educate students. And students are afraid to even go to school and learn. That is what Nigeria, the giant of Africa, is reduced to. Child safety, which should be the number one on the list of any civilized world or any civilized community, has, in my opinion, been put on the back burner. More attention is focused on building flyovers and roads, but no one is really focused on the security of schools, especially boarding schools in Nigeria. So I'm going to tell you my boarding school story. My father was abroad, sent me back to Nigeria to attend boarding school for 2 years. And I'm going to tell you the problem. And in my own personal opinion, from my own personal experiences, having attended boarding school in Nigeria as a child, I honestly think that some of these boarding schools should be shut down immediately. Not all, some. Because there's a lot of gaps and a lot of security issues facing the boarding school system in Nigeria. What is really the benefit? And I'm talking to parents directly. What sort of benefit do you see in sending your child to go and learn in an unsupervised environment? I can never send my girls to a boarding school. I can never put their safety at risk. Like my father put my safety at risk. Yes, he went to boarding school. I actually went to the same boarding school that he went to in the 60s and mid 60s, 70s. It was an experience that I would not wish on anybody. And if you are a parent right now, you are considering sending your child to a boarding school in Nigeria, don't do it. There's a lot of issues safety-wise. In this particular case, it was an all-girls school. You are basically handling the safety and supervision of young girls. Because if you think about it, it's the so-called seniors, right, that are supervising these young kids. I was one of those seniors. Essentially, you have kids supervising kids in an environment like that. It's also a danger to the young girls. I'm not talking about the militants right now. Let's talk about internally in the boarding school system, internally. Some of these instructors and teachers may be having relations with students. They may be having relations with minors. I know for a fact that this happened because in the boarding school that I went to, you had old men, teachers, engaged in relations. Yes, me, I went to an all boys at that time. Now that school is now co-op. It's now boys and girls. But mine was all boys. So there were teachers having relations with young female students in other schools close to other boarding schools close to mine. So it was like we had our own boys school, and then just maybe a couple of miles on the other side of town, there were girls' schools. So these things are happening. I'm just talking about internally. We're going to dive into the external risks involved. What did I really learn in boarding school? To be honest with you, when I look back now, other than the friends that I made, I can seriously tell you that I did not learn really anything substantial throughout my experience in the boarding school system in Nigeria, and I was only there for 2 years. Some of you are putting your children from as young as 7. Jeanette, my daughter, is 7 years old. She's in first grade here in the United States. Some of you are even putting them at such a young age. There are people right now from the tender age of primary 1 or 2, or in Jeanette's grade, in Jeanette's case, she's in the first grade. From that level of education up till maybe even SS3, their entire experience is in the boarding school system. Exposed to predators. This also applies to boys too. Exposed to danger, exposed to a toxic environment. That is what is happening right now in the boarding school system. Now, as far as these militant groups, it has now become a full-blown business operation for them because the school system is relatively an easy target for them. In my time, I didn't recall seeing any security on site. You see, a gatesman that just sits there, opening the gate for cars, closing the gate for cars, that is not security. That is a hired gatesman that maybe is making 10,000 naira a month, if that. Tops 20,000 naira a month. That is the security system you are entrusting, or you may be entrusting your children to. And not just parents, also the local government elected officials in charge of these schools. Essentially, it's a petri dish for crime. It's an easy target for criminals. Because you can't really, so I'm former military, I'm ex-military. Do you know how long it takes to plan and coordinate a convoy attack like that? These guys probably surveyed the school, did a test run, knowing that there is no single barrier to them and access to the school. There's really not. That is why these pickups and snatches and abductions continue to happen. Because the school compound is not protected. The school compound is not guarded. These students are waking up every day. Speaking directly now to the parents, what would motivate you to want to put your child? See, people are looking at it more from the militant perspective. You see, to them, it's a petri dish. They just go snatch, do whatever they want. But who allowed that to happen? It's the parents that put their children in an environment like that, exposing them to danger, exposing them to insecurity. On what grounds? To go and learn what? Camaraderie. To go and learn what? Social skills. Your children belong at home with you. When you send them off to school, you send them off like we do here. Obviously, I cannot compare the American, but I don't know anything about the American public school system. I'm sorry, the boarding school system. I went to a public. I know the public school system, maybe the private school system in the US. But the boarding school system is something that I'm not familiar with, so I can't really speak on that. But I can speak on my experience only, having attended boarding school in Nigeria. It may have been safer in the 60s. Maybe that is the reason why my dad thought it was a good idea to send me. And when I was in boarding school in the 90s, were there abductions happening? Maybe. But the difference between then and now is then we didn't have social media. There wasn't really any platform where people can go and report things that they see. Unlike social media now, where something happens within a few minutes, it's global news. That is why I'm advocating for most of these public schools. Many of them, I will probably say, honestly, 90% of them should be shut down for good. And put the responsibility. You see, a kid doesn't need to go to boarding school to learn anything. It's not as if parents are there helping with homework. They are not. In some cases, they'll put them in for a semester and they don't see the parent again until maybe visitation. How often do they visit? Listen, in my time, I didn't recall too many. There was no such thing as parent visitation day at the boarding school that I went to. If anything, it was the kids self that will go home. The parents rarely showed up. The entire time that I was there, my dad didn't visit me once. You are leaving your kids in an unsupervised environment to be coached, to be taught, to be educated by people you don't know. We need, the criminality is wrong, but we also need to start pointing the lens at the parents. It's time for you to pull your kids out of the boarding school system and keep them in an environment where they leave the house and go to school, obtain their education, and return home under the watchful eyes and under the supervision of the parents. That is my clear message right now. Because schools in Nigeria, boarding schools in Nigeria, are an easy target for these people. Exposing, you are basically, you see, now it's going to get to a point now where these schools are going to start becoming a recruiting ground for these militants. Because those kids are not supervised, they are not watched, they are not protected. And the mental problem with that now is it spreads. I would hate for my child. You see, every day my daughter wakes up every day excited to go to school. Are we now in a society? That's actually where we are heading. Where kids are just going to flat out refuse to gain an education, to be educated, for fear of what I just mentioned. This issue is an ongoing issue. And before we throw the blame on those committing these atrocious acts, let's also look at the parents. The focus should really be on the parents. We also need to look at law enforcement as well. Where is the intelligence, the law enforcement intelligence infiltrating these camps? Because think about it for a second. 60 motorcycles, a convoy of 60 motorbikes was what they used. And I read they also had a van. So they are loading kids up in a van. A van can't hold 60 kids. Others are being thrown on the backs or the front of these motorcycles and hauled away. You see, it doesn't stop at the snatching and the abduction. They also have to feed these kids. Something is happening. There's just no way that you can camp 60 children. If you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. My 2 kids, it's hard to control them in the house. They are running, they are fighting, they need something to eat, they need care, they're bothering you to buy things for them. Kids are a handful. It takes a lot to maintain children and raise children. It takes a lot of discipline and a lot of focus to do that. How are these armed military? By the way, they have to be fed. Someone has to cook for the kids. You just don't take them in and not care for them. Something is happening. Somebody knows something. But they choose to remain quiet. The ripple effect is there. If they can get away with it in Kebbi State, why can't we get away with it in Niger? Okay, they are getting away with it in Niger State. Why can't they get away with it in Kaduna State? It is the boarding schools. I'm not talking all. Some schools are great. Me personally, the boarding school system did not benefit me one bit. I survived boarding school just largely due to share of what? Self-discipline, self-motivation. I was the one that I studied on my own. Nobody made me study. Another thing you also have to factor in is the abuse, the neglect. In my school system, we had dirty toilets. People were going inside the bush to ease themselves. Where is the psychological benefit in subjecting children to that environment. You see, your boarding school in the 60s and 70s is not the same boarding school in 2025. No child should be left unsupervised. What is your reason? Are most of you sending your kids to school so you don't have to care for them? What is the reason? Are you sending your kids to a boarding school so you don't have to raise them to become responsible citizens of Nigeria? Why are you in 2025 still exposing your child? I'm not championing for these guys that are picking up kids left and right. The audacity, because it's easy. It's comfortable for them to be able to hop on and convoy. I was in several convoys throughout my time in the military. It takes coordination. It takes planning. But these guys, these motorcycle gang, van gangs, going around, operating at free will, operating without resistance whatsoever. You are putting your children, exposing your children to that. You see, we can fight all of the criminalities that's happening as far as like school abduction, children being abducted. But we also need to start holding parents accountable. There are options out there. There are schools out there, a normal school where you go from 7 o'clock to 3 o'clock, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. At the end, the teacher goes their separate ways. The children goes home. That is where you want to put your kids. You can't endanger your own children, putting them in an unsupervised environment. Those kids are emotionally, and for the most part, even those that escape, and even though I know that the Nigerian law enforcement is doing everything that they can to get those kids back, do we have psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors in place to counsel these kids when they return home? They are going to be scarred for life. No child should ever have to not feel safe and comfortable obtaining an education. We need an educated workforce, and it starts with our children. Usually, majority of these people committing these crimes are probably non-educated. Is that the life you want for your children? I'm talking to parents now. Pull your kids from these boarding schools. Even then, as a child attending, I knew something was wrong. We were flogged. We were beaten by the seniors. We didn't have any nutritious foods to eat. Unsanitary environment. And then we have to wake up and go and be taught by teachers who may be potentially engaged, abusing the kids under their supervision and under their care. So before we start blaming, and yes, we need to 100% crush these people that are doing these things. But we also need to look at the parents. We also need to look at our educational school system. If a local government or state is unable to build security around a particular school, that school deserves to be shut down. And for those of you parents adamant about sending your kids to the boarding school system, are you assessing the environment for their safety? Are you doing that? Or are you sending your kids into harm's way in hopes of obtaining an education? Now, tell me, those kids that are out of school right now, they're obtaining an education. Would they even be confident to return to that school upon their release? Would they feel safe? Let's have it. We are having a serious conversation here. The boarding school system in Nigeria is perfectly flawed. It's failing our school kids. When they go to school, I'm sending them for one thing and one thing alone: to obtain an education and become productive citizens. That is what I'm sending them to school for. I'm not sending them to school to expose them to harm, to expose them to danger, and to expose them to be recruited. That is my message today. The boarding school system in Nigeria does not work. They must be shut down. And we need to create an environment where children can go and succeed. Every single day we are waking up to these abductions. You see, this hits home for me because my family is relatively an education family. My wife is a teacher. So it does hit home for me, and that's why I wanted to talk about this. If you are considering sending your children to schools that are unprotected, you see, even if that gate man, let's say he was armed, he's no match now for a gang of 60 motorbike gangs. Are we now at a point where we need to have a command center at every school? Is that where we are going? The Western school system is safe. Yes, occasionally you will have issues here and there. But there's always a police officer armed, patrolling the school system, you go to a school. Schools are safe. For the most part, schools in the US are safe, contrary to a little bit of shootings here and there. That is what we need. All these Chinese loans that we are getting, how many are actually earmarked for school security? That is where it starts. That is how it developed. That is how we can get out of this developing uh, industry and get into a developed nation. It has to start with our school system. It's not more flyovers, more road constructions, more hotels being built. If we are going to have a boarding school, they need to be protected properly. They need to be guarded properly. Otherwise, they must be shut down. Because this is not a good look. 3 weeks ago, it was about Donald Trump putting Nigeria on the map, about the killings of Christians. Now, it's as if this school matter, these abductions, this easy target is just now becoming, oh, it's just another Friday. And what do? They'll release a press statement. Oh, we condemn the abductions. Condemn? What about going and removing the people causing the problems? Or better yet, what about educating parents that there are other options for their children and not boarding schools where they are not protected? We don't want to hear anymore. Me personally, I don't want to hear anymore. Pray for the kids. We don't want prayers for the kids. We want safety for the kids. We want better intelligence for the sake of the future of the children of Nigeria, because they are the ones that are going to lead Nigeria in the future. They need to be educated. They need to feel safe reading their books, learning. We don't need more roads. That is my message to parents. Reconsider. Think about your children. We ain't putting them in boarding school. It's not happening. Even in America, it's not happening. If I didn't want to care for a kid, I should not have one. Some of you are using boarding schools as a dumping ground to go and dump your child because you don't want the responsibility of having to care for them at home. Let's be honest, that's what most people are doing. To be quite honest with you, I felt that I was dumped in boarding school because I didn't learn anything. I did not. I didn't learn anything in boarding school that I could not have learned at home. I did not. Boarding school did not benefit me one bit in Nigeria. I was at the mercy of strangers. Thankfully, I wasn't physically abused and I wasn't emotionally abused. But that is not the case for majority of the students in these boarding schools in Nigeria. (2025) and beyond. You see, boarding school was back, they were popular in the British era. First Republic, maybe Second Republic of Nigeria. Boarding schools was okay. But in this day and age, excuse me guys, send this person to voicemail. But in this day and age of the unrest that's happening across Nigeria right now, the boarding school system is no longer viable. It is not. Let's pull our children out of these traps and bring them home. You see, a child cannot, you see, for me, for us, our foundation in this family is to build a safe space for for our kids first and foremost. And it starts with home. Charity begins at home. Because only from a safe environment and a safe space can children then go out into the world and blossom. They cannot blossom from a toxic foundation. Yes, some people are able to overcome, but how many are really able to overcome a toxic foundation to then become responsible adults? This is beyond embarrassment for Nigeria. That militants are emboldened enough to be able to attack children as they are sleeping. 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. These kids don't even know what's going on. And then they are hauled off into their base. Some of them may not come back, let's be honest. And we can't be condemning anymore. We really need to do more in terms of protecting the future of Nigeria. And the future of Nigeria are the children. That is my message this Friday. I hope that you digest this, pass this information on. Reforms is not going to work. Parents need to take things into their own hands and pull their children from these dangerous environments. You see, arming teachers isn't going to do anything. Having more security is not really going to do much, because the schoolyard should not be a prison yard where children are walking around and there are people holding guns everywhere guarding. I think it's time that we shut down these boarding schools, guys, and redirect the resources to institutions that can guarantee the safety, protection, and education of our children. These are kids. A 17-year-old SS2, SS3, 18, they are all kids. We need to protect our kids. So I'm saying some, not all. Maybe we need to start auditing schools that may be prone to attacks, and just closing them down. That's plain and simple. We can't have any more rotten, I can't stand them, dirty, rotten people putting their paws on children. For what? For ransom. Are we now in the ransom business in Nigeria? Children abduction ransom business. Is that what we have been reduced to? The giants of Africa. Is that? That's my message. If this resonates with you, like, share, and comment. And if you really like my content, consider subscribing and look through our videos. I really appreciate your time, guys. It's Friday. I want to start my weekend. All the best. I'll catch you on the next one.